January 3rd, 2026. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, if you were following the news that day, you might have heard some whispers of a crisis, but the reality was just so much more shocking.
It really was. We have sources that paint this incredible picture of a heavily curtained room down in Florida, lit just by monitors.
And the U.S. president is just watching. Not a movie, but a live military operation unfolding thousands of miles away in Caracas, Venezuela.
And in just a few minutes, the sitting president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, is captured by American forces. It's a sudden, sharp shock felt by the entire global community.
Right, and that operation was codenamed Absolute Resolve. It sent immediate shockwaves.
Huge shockwaves.
Yeah.
What we all witnessed was the most powerful country on earth, unilaterally kidnapping an elected leader of a sovereign nation right out of his own home.
And that action immediately raises two massive questions. First, what was the real reason America did this? And second, what does a move this aggressive really mean for the future of international order? So today we are diving deep into all the source materials, articles, intelligence reports, legal analyses that detail every single layer of this. We're going to put the official justifications, those alleged drug charges, head-to-head against the evidence.
Evidence that, frankly, points very strongly toward oil, resource control, or maybe even just political maneuvering back home.
Our mission here is to give you the full, clear picture. We want to cut through the noise and just compare the official story with the documented facts.
Okay, let's get into it.
So the execution of Absolute Resolve. The sources describe it as just a textbook demonstration of military stealth and speed.
Oh, absolutely. The approach was engineered to be virtually invisible. American helicopters flying just 100 feet above the Caribbean.
To stay under the radar.
Completely under the radar as they were nearing Venezuelan airspace. And the first move wasn't even kinetic, it was digital.
Right, the cyber attack. That's what kicked it all off.
It did. A sophisticated attack that just systematically disabled the power grid in Caracas, plunging the whole capital city into total darkness.
Which is a huge psychological and logistical step. It sets a really severe precedent, doesn't it? Combining digital warfare with a conventional military action against a head of state.
It really does. It sounds like something from a spy thriller, but the details are all there in the sources.
Delta Force commandos rappelling directly onto the roof of Maduro's residence. They find a window, enter the sleeping quarters, and Maduro apparently wakes up and makes this frantic attempt to get to his safe room.
A steel-reinforced safe room, but he never made it.
Never made it.
He was captured within 5 minutes of the commandos even entering the building. That level of precision is just staggering.
And Trump later said he watched it literally like I was watching a TV show.
Yeah. But I think it's important to remember the human cost here. We're talking about 40 people who lost their lives in this operation.
Wait, 40 people? In what the administration was calling a law enforcement function.
Exactly. Between the airstrikes they used to soften the defenses and the actual infiltration, 40 people died.
How? How did the sources even try to reconcile that casualty count with the claim that this was a simple arrest?
They don't. Frankly, they can't. That massive casualty count completely undermines the whole law enforcement narrative. It just shows the massive disconnect between the stated goal and the actual military force required.
And the message they sent afterward was just as forceful. Maduro is flown by helicopter to the USS Iwo Jima, then Guantanamo Bay.
And then they released that photograph of him in chains at an Air National Guard base in New York.
The public display. It was a deliberate, shocking demonstration of power and impunity.
Absolutely.
So the idea that this was some kind of snap decision is just completely refuted by the material we've got. The sources show this was months of meticulous, highly coordinated planning.
It all started back in August of 2025. That's when a small CIA team was deployed to Venezuela without any diplomatic cover.
Which is an enormous risk. If they get caught, the U.S. government has no official way to help them.
None. And their mission was total surveillance, tracking every detail of Maduro's life, his routine, his security, his travel patterns, even, the staffing schedules at his house. They had to anticipate everything.
And they had help from the inside.
A crucial asset. The intelligence reports confirm there was a critical source inside the Venezuelan government feeding them real-time data on Maduro's exact location right up to the capture.
Without that insider, the whole thing would have been far riskier. Maybe even impossible.
It's very likely. And the sources say the final green light only came after a definitive ultimatum was given in November 2025.
This was the phone call between Trump and Maduro.
The direct phone call, yeah. Trump basically told him to step down. Secretary of State Marco Rubio later said Maduro was given multiple very, very, very generous offers to leave power peacefully.
That he refused.
He refused, and that's when the planning shifted into absolute overdrive.
And the logistical prep is just astonishing. They built an exact duplicate of Maduro's entire house in a secret location in Kentucky.
An exact duplicate. I mean, can you even imagine the commitment that takes?
Yeah.
Weeks and weeks of Delta Force commandos rehearsing the capture over and over again on this perfect mock-up.
Just to get that 5-minute capture window down to the second.
Exactly.
So the final order was approved on Christmas Day, December 25th.
And that timing was completely intentional. It was designed to take advantage of the fact that a lot of Venezuelan military personnel would be on holiday leave.
But then it was delayed by a few days because of bad weather. The final go-ahead came late on January 2nd.
And that's when you see the true scale of the air power involved. Within minutes of that final authorization, over 150 American military aircraft took off from 20 different bases.
Wow. 150.
Simultaneously. And that was followed by precision airstrikes to just neutralize every radar installation, every air defense system around Caracas. This was not a skirmish. This was a massive, overwhelming projection of force, all focused on seizing one man.
But to understand the real calculation here, we have to look past the official charges. Officially, the administration claimed this wasn't about regime change, it wasn't about resources, it was just law enforcement.
Purely crime fighting. The official citation was drug trafficking.
Right. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were indicted in New York on charges including narcoterrorism, cocaine importation, basically saying he'd supported drug trafficking since 1999.
And this is where, you really have to dig into the source data. Because according to multiple experts cited in our material, Venezuela is consistently ranked as only a minor cocaine transit country.
And most of the cocaine that does go through Venezuela is headed for Europe, not the U.S.
Exactly. If you actually follow the U.S. cocaine supply chain, the data shows the vast majority comes from Colombia, Guatemala, and Mexico. They use the Pacific route.
And Venezuela doesn't have a Pacific coast. It's a basic geographical fact that makes it pretty improbable as a primary supply hub for the U.S.
Right. And the numbers make it even clearer. The U.S. indictment claimed that up until 2020, about 200 to 250 metric tons of cocaine were allegedly shipped annually from Venezuela.
Okay, 250 metric tons. Now compare that to Guatemala.
In 2018 alone, Guatemala exported 1,400 metric tons. So if the mission was truly about stopping cocaine from entering America, why send 150 aircraft to Venezuela when other countries pose a demonstrably bigger threat?
It doesn't add up. And then there's the fentanyl factor.
A huge deflection. The main driver of overdose deaths in the U.S. isn't cocaine, it's fentanyl. And that comes from Mexico using chemicals from China.
And Venezuela has no documented role in that supply chain whatsoever.
Yeah.
So if this was about saving American lives from drugs, the focus seems entirely misplaced.
It does. And Maduro himself actually called this out 3 days before the operation. He said the drug charges were false, invented, and he specifically drew a parallel to the U.S. justification for the Iraq War in 2003.
The weapons of mass destruction that were never found.
Exactly. The idea of using a false pretext to justify a pre-planned invasion? The sources suggest that's precisely what was happening here.
And the hypocrisy is just amplified by another action, right?
Yeah.
Just a month before this, Trump pardoned the former Honduran president,
Juan Orlando Hernandez, who had been convicted in the U.S. for smuggling over 400 tons of cocaine.
400 tons. That's almost double the total annual amount they were pinning on Venezuela.
So the political calculation seems pretty clear. If you align with U.S. interests, your drug crimes can be dismissed. If you stand in opposition, even flimsy charges are enough to justify an invasion.
Okay, so if the drug justification just doesn't hold up, the evidence really points us toward a much older, much clearer motive: oil.
It always comes back to oil. Venezuela has the largest amount of proven crude oil reserves in the world, 303 billion barrels.
That's more than Saudi Arabia and the U.S. combined.
Significantly more. And oil has been their national engine since it was discovered in 1922. By 1929, they were the second largest oil producer in the world.
And the forces really emphasized that this wasn't just any oil. Venezuelan crude is heavier, more sour. For decades, U.S. refineries were literally built to process this specific type of crude,
which made guaranteed access to it a critical strategic necessity for the U.S. energy sector for decades.
The conflict really ignited in the 2000s when Hugo Chavez and then Maduro nationalized the entire industry.
The 2001 Organic Hydrocarbons Law. It declared state ownership over all oil and gas, and it effectively forced American multinational companies out. And that loss of control became an immediate, irreconcilable flashpoint.
The U.S. government just couldn't tolerate being shut out of the world's biggest oil reserve. So sanctions followed in 2005, and by 2019, they were blocking all exports from PDVSA, the state oil company.
It crushed Venezuela's production down to almost nothing, about 0.8% of world output, but it didn't give the U.S. control.
Which brings us to the clearest, most unvarnished admission of the true motive. It came the day after the capture.
Directly from the U.S. leadership, Trump publicly stated, and this is a direct quote, "It was the greatest theft in the history of America. They took oil away from us."
That one quote. The source documents highlight it as the central admission. The idea that a sovereign nation controlling its own national resources was viewed by the administration as a theft against America.
That's the key takeaway. Plus, you have to look at who Venezuela was trading with. China was buying 68% of their oil.
An unacceptable strategic alliance in Washington's eyes.
Absolutely. And immediately after the capture, Trump announced American oil companies would now invest billions to rebuild the infrastructure in Venezuela. It couldn't be clearer that resource control was the core driver.
So what does this all mean for the legal structure of the world? I mean, setting aside the military might, the legal fallout seems to be shattering the foundations of global rules.
Well, the sources immediately point out that this was a fundamental violation of U.S. domestic law. The Constitution requires congressional approval for any military action or war.
And Trump just bypassed Congress entirely. No oversight, no declaration.
Right. And to avoid that, the administration used this very weak legal argument that it was just a law enforcement function.
Which is an impossible claim to sustain. 150 military aircraft, cyber attacks, 40 people dead. That is not serving an arrest warrant. That's an act of war.
It is. And internationally, the violation is undeniable. Article 2 of the UN Charter is the bedrock of the modern system. It clearly forbids using military force against another state's sovereignty.
And the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, confirmed it was a clear violation of that charter.
The international condemnation was immediate. And this wasn't just from adversaries. We're talking Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Spain democracies, neighbors issuing a joint statement calling this a dangerous precedent.
So even key allies were condemning it.
They were. And yet the sources conclude that despite the violations, accountability is, well, it's unlikely. The problem is power.
The U.S. holds veto power on the UN Security Council.
Exactly. So while the Security Council could impose sanctions, the U.S. can just veto it. And that lack of accountability reinforces the whole philosophy behind actions like this.
And the projection of power didn't stop in Venezuela. The sources document Trump immediately making new threats.
Against Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, against Cuba, Mexico, even Greenland, and a specific threat against India if it didn't stop buying Russian oil. It showed the old rulebook had been completely thrown out.
So when you look at the complete picture, the lightning-fast operation, the flimsy drug charges, the overwhelming evidence for oil as the motive, and the total disregard for law, it points to a very clear and dangerous philosophy.
It does. And that philosophy, which is articulated across the source material, is basically that rules exist only for the weak. The powerful can just choose which rules to follow and which to ignore.
The sources label it New Age colonialism.
That's the term they use. And this leads us to the critical question you have to consider, because this action fundamentally changes the rules of the road for how powerful nations compete.
We have to look at the precedent that's been set here. If the most powerful nation in the world justifies invading another country to seize its resources, what signal does that send?
What happens when other major powers, say China, wanting to secure resources in the South China Sea, or Russia, wanting to ensure control over its neighbors, decides to adopt this exact same doctrine?
The U.S. action basically validates their future claims.
So what are the true long-term costs of this operation for global stability? If the powerful feel they have a license to unilaterally dismantle the very global institutions they helped build, that's the real danger you must mull over as the world processes this unprecedented event.